You shall be my Duchess.
But she is completely unsuitable, Your Grace.
He cannot be serious.
7 days. That was all the time the Duke of Westmoreland had to find a wife, or lose his ancestral empire to a cousin who despised him. The grand halls were filled with desperate debutantes, but the woman who ultimately stole his heart wasn't even on the guest list. The rain lashed against the towering stained glass windows of the London townhouse, mirroring the violent storm brewing inside the mind of Alistair Montgomery. At 29, Alistair, the Duke of Westmoreland, was a man who possessed everything the modern aristocracy coveted: staggering wealth, a face carved from cold marble, and a title that commanded the respect of the entire House of Lords. He was also a man who had sworn off love entirely after a catastrophic betrayal in his youth. But on this damp Tuesday evening in November of 1842, his ironclad control over his life was shattered by a single piece of yellowed parchment. Sitting across from him in the dimly lit study was Mr. Oliver Thackeray, the family's senior solicitor from Coutts & Co., looking profoundly uncomfortable. Thackeray cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. "I am deeply sorry, Your Grace, but the late Duke, your father, was quite explicit. We only discovered this codicil hidden within the secondary vaults this morning." Alistair stared at the document, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. "Read it again, Thackeray. The exact phrasing. Should my heir, Alistair, fail to take a lawfully wedded wife by the stroke of midnight on his 30th birthday, the entirety of the unentailed Westmoreland fortune, including Somerton Park and the London properties, shall bypass him entirely and revert to his cousin, Lord Nathaniel Hardwicke." Thackeray paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Your 30th birthday is next Tuesday, Your Grace. You have exactly 7 days." Alistair slammed his fist onto the mahogany desk. Nathaniel Hardwicke was a notorious gambler, a man of vicious cruelty who had once bankrupted a family simply because he lost a horse race to their patriarch. To hand the Westmoreland legacy to Nathaniel was unthinkable. It would ruin thousands of tenants who depended on the estate. 7 days, Alistair breathed, the reality sinking in like a stone. "My father, even from the grave, seeks to punish me for refusing to marry the alliances he chose. What shall we do, Your Grace?" "We do what we must," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a glacial whisper. "Send word to my aunt. Tell her to open Somerton Park immediately. Invite the 5 most eligible, undisputed daughters of the peerage for a week-long country retreat. Tell them, I am finally looking to settle my estate." By Thursday afternoon, the sprawling grounds of Somerton Park were completely overrun by a chaotic parade of gilded carriages, desperate mothers, and overly perfumed debutantes. The prize was the highest in the land, and the scent of desperation was suffocating. Among the invitees was Lady Victoria Melbourne, widely considered the favorite. Victoria was breathtakingly beautiful, armed with a dowry of £50,000, and possessed a smile that hid the calculating mind of a battlefield general. But trailing behind Lady Victoria, struggling under the weight of 3 heavy velvet cloak boxes and an umbrella, was her cousin and paid companion, Miss Cecily Rutherford. Cecily was 26, a quiet, observant woman who had been utterly ruined by society's standards. 4 years ago, her father, a minor baron, had made a series of disastrous investments, ending his life in disgrace and leaving Cecily entirely destitute. Stripped of her standing, she had been forced into the humiliating role of an unpaid servant to her wealthy, spoiled cousin. Cecily had long ago traded her romantic illusions for survival. She wore a simple, unadorned gray woolen dress, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, practical knot, rendering her practically invisible among the glittering peacocks of the drawing room. And invisible was exactly how she preferred to be. That first evening, a lavish banquet was held in the grand dining hall. Alistair sat at the head of the long table nursing a glass of claret, feeling more like a piece of meat at an auction than a duke. Lady Victoria sat to his immediate right, touching his arm far too often, laughing loudly at every mild observation he made. The other 4 women, Lady Sarah, Miss Penelope, Miss Catherine, and Lady Louisa vied ruthlessly for his attention, subtly insulting each other over the turtle soup. Cecily sat at the very far end of the table, near the draughty doors used by the footmen. She ate in silence, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She noticed how the Duke's knuckles turned white around his wine-glass whenever Lady Victoria leaned in. She noticed the slight, cynical tightening of his eyes when Lady Sarah feigned an interest in his agricultural reforms. He is miserable, Cecily thought, taking a sip of her water. He is a trapped animal, and these women are merely deciding who gets to wear the fur. After dinner, unable to stomach the cloying atmosphere of the drawing-room any longer, Alistair slipped away. He needed air. He needed silence. He strode down the dimly lit corridor toward the massive two-story library, a sanctuary strictly off-limits to guests. He pushed open the heavy oak doors, expecting the comforting smell of old paper and leather. Instead, he found someone already there, standing on a small wooden step stool, holding a flickering candelabra in one hand and tracing the spine of a massive ancient atlas with the other, was the woman in gray, Cecily. "This room is strictly forbidden to guests," Alistair barked, his temper flaring at the intrusion. Cecily didn't gasp. She didn't drop the candle or swoon. She merely turned her head, fixing him with a gaze of striking, unfazed hazel eyes. "I am not a guest, Your Grace," she replied, her voice smooth and grounded. "I am staff, or near enough to it, and your housekeeper, Mrs. Danvers, requested I fetch a geographical dictionary for Lady Victoria, who wishes to impress you tomorrow with her sudden, profound interest in the topography of your Scottish estates." Alistair stopped cold. The blatant, brutal honesty of the remark caught him completely off guard. "Is that so?" he asked, stepping further into the room, the anger draining away into genuine curiosity. "Yes," Cecily said, stepping down from the stool and dusting off her skirt, "though I'd advise you not to ask her about the Highlands. She believes Edinburgh is a type of cheese." A startling, unfamiliar sound escaped Alistair's chest. It was a laugh, short, rough, and entirely genuine. Cecily looked at him, a faint, wry smile touching the corners of her lips. In that quiet, shadowy library, away from the glittering masks and the ticking clock of his inheritance, Alistair looked at Cecily Rutherford and, for the first time in his life, actually saw her. By the morning of the fourth day, the tension at Somerton Park was a physical weight pressing down on the estate. The masquerade of polite society was beginning to crack. The ladies, realizing the Duke was running out of time, though they didn't know the exact reason why, resorted to quiet sabotage. A ruined dress here, a misplaced letter there. Alistair found the entire charade sickening. The only fleeting moments of sanity he possessed were the accidental, stolen encounters with Cecily. He found himself actively seeking her out. He would spot her in the conservatory, tending to her cousin's discarded shawls, and strike up conversations about botany. He would find her in the morning room organizing the mail, and they would exchange quiet, devastatingly witty critiques of the ongoing circus. She did not flatter him. She did not lower her eyes when he spoke. Cecily Rutherford looked at the Duke of Westmoreland as a man, not a title, and Alistair found it completely intoxicating. On Saturday afternoon, an archery tournament was arranged on the great lawn. The crisp autumn air was filled with the sounds of polite applause and false giggles. Lady Victoria, dressed in a stunning riding habit of deep emerald green, took her position. She drew the bow with exaggerated delicacy, deliberately missing the target by 3 feet to appear fragile and in need of the Duke's expert instruction. "Oh, I am simply too weak for this dreadful weapon, Your Grace," Victoria sighed, looking up at him through her eyelashes. "Perhaps you could show me?" Alistair gritted his teeth, obliging out of sheer politeness, wrapping his hands over hers to guide the bow. From the edge of the lawn, Cecily watched, her face an unreadable mask. She turned away, intending to retreat to the kitchens, when a cold, arrogant voice stopped her. "Well, well, if it isn't the disgraced Rutherford girl, still fetching water for your betters, I see." Cecily froze, She turned to see Lord Nathaniel Hardwick leaning against a marble statue. He was a sharp-featured man with pale eyes that held a permanent, cruel amusement. He had arrived uninvited that morning, much to Alistair's undisguised fury. Nathaniel knew about the codicil. He was here to watch the clock run out, to revel in his cousin's misery. "Lord Hardwick," Cecily said, her voice ice-cold, "I am surprised to see you here. I was unaware rats ventured this far from the London sewers." Nathaniel's smile vanished. He stepped into her personal space, looming over her. "Mind your tongue, little orphan. In a few days, I will be the master of this estate. And when I am, I will ensure you and your insufferable cousin are thrown out into the mud where you belong." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Unless, of course, you wish to make yourself useful to me." "I would rather drink poison," Cecily hissed, stepping back. "Is there a problem here, Hardwick?" The voice cracked across the lawn like a whip. Alistair was striding toward them, his eyes blazing with a protective fury he didn't quite understand. He stepped smoothly between Cecily and his cousin, his broad shoulders shielding her completely. Nathaniel held up his hands in mock surrender. "No problem at all, dear cousin, just catching up with an old acquaintance. Miss Rutherford and I share a colorful history in London society." Before her father blew his brains out over his debts, of course. Cecily flinched as if struck. The color drained from her face. Alistair's hand shot out, grabbing Nathaniel by the lapels of his expensive coat, lifting him practically onto his toes. "If you ever speak to her in such a manner again," Alistair snarled, every syllable dripping with lethal intent, "I will not wait for a duel. I will break your neck with my bare hands. Now, get off my lawn." Nathaniel scoffed, wrenching himself free and straightening his coat. "Tick-tock, Alistair. 3 days left." He offered a mocking bow and sauntered away. Alistair turned to Cecily, his chest heaving. "Are you all right?" She was shaking, staring at the ground. The carefully constructed armor she wore every day fractured by the cruel reminder of her trauma. "I must go," she whispered, turning to flee. "Cecily, wait!" Alistair reached out, catching her wrist. The touch sent a shockwave through them both. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears, and for a terrifying second, Alistair wanted nothing more than to pull her into his arms, to kiss away the pain, to forget the estate, the legacy, the ticking clock. But a throat cleared behind them. It was Lady Victoria, her eyes narrowed into venomous slits. "Cecily, I have been looking for you everywhere. My hem is torn. Come fix it immediately." Cecily instantly pulled her hand from Alistair's grasp, the mask slamming back into place. "Yes, Victoria," she murmured, lowering her head and hurrying away. Alistair watched her go, a profound, agonizing realization washing over him. He had 3 days to choose a bride, and the only woman he wanted was the one he could not possibly have. A penniless companion, a woman steeped in scandal. The ton would tear her apart. It would be social suicide. But as he watched her gray dress disappear into the manor, Alistair knew he didn't care. Day 5 arrived with a suffocating urgency. It was Sunday. The grand ball, where Alistair was expected to announce his betrothal, was scheduled for Monday night. The wedding would be forced through by special license on Tuesday, his birthday. The walls of Somerton Park felt like they were closing in. That afternoon, disaster struck. The entire household was thrown into chaos when it was discovered that the Montgomery sapphire, a priceless, fist-sized jewel that Alistair's mother had worn on her wedding day, traditionally given to the bride-to-be, had vanished from the Duke's locked study. The estate was placed on lockdown. Guests whispered furiously behind closed doors. Alistair summoned the local magistrate, but before a formal search could begin, Lady Victoria burst into the main drawing room, her face a mask of theatrical horror, holding a small velvet pouch. "I found it!" Victoria cried, waving the pouch for all to see. "I was looking for my misplaced pearl earrings, and I found it." Alistair stood, his expression dark. "Where, Lady Victoria?" Victoria turned slowly, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly at Cecily, who was standing quietly by the fireplace, hidden beneath the mattress in my cousin's chambers. Oh, Cecily, how could you? I know you have been destitute since your father's disgraceful ruin, but to steal from our host? The room erupted into gasps. Cecily stood frozen, the blood rushing in her ears. She looked at the sapphire in Victoria's hand, then at the smug, triumphant gleam in her cousin's eye. Victoria had noticed Alistair's growing attachment to her companion. This was an assassination, a brutal, calculated move to eliminate a rival and secure her position as the injured, loyal savior of the family jewel. "I did not take it," Cecily said, her voice remarkably steady despite the terror gripping her heart. "I have never set foot inside His Grace's study."
"The jewel was in your bed!"
Victoria shrieked, playing to the crowd.
"Your Grace! She is a thief! She must be handed over to the magistrate. She will hang for this, or be transported to the colonies."
Alistair stared at Cecily. The silence in the room stretched until it was agonizing. Every eye watched the Duke, waiting for him to unleash his fury upon the disgraced girl. Nathaniel Hardwick watched from the corner, swirling his brandy, a devilish grin on his face. Alistair walked slowly across the room, stopping inches from Cecily. He looked down into her hazel eyes. He was searching for something. Fear, guilt, deception. But all he saw was a quiet, heartbreaking resignation. She expected him to condemn her. She had been abandoned by the world once before, and she fully expected him to do the same. "Get out," Alistair said quietly. The room gasped again. Victoria smiled triumphantly. "Yes. Throw her out into the—" "Not her!" Alistair roared, spinning to face the room, his voice shaking the crystal chandeliers. "All of you, get out of this room, now!" Within seconds, the drawing room emptied, leaving only Alistair and Cecily. The heavy oak doors clicked shut. "Why didn't you defend yourself?" Alistair demanded, pacing like a caged panther. "Why do you just stand there and let her ruin you?" "Because she has the power, and I have none." Cecily fired back, her own composure finally breaking. "I am a ruined woman, Your Grace. The word of a wealthy lady will always outweigh the word of a penniless companion. It doesn't matter what the truth is." "It matters to me," Alistair shouted, stopping in front of her. "Why?" Cecily cried, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "Why do you care? You have a duty to fulfill. You have 2 days to choose one of those vipers and save your precious estate. You should have let her hand me over to the magistrate. It would have made everything easier for you." "Do you think I care about the estate?" Alistair grabbed her shoulders, pulling her flush against him. "Do you think I care about the money, the title, or any of it when you are in danger? I know you didn't steal that sapphire, Cecily. I know exactly who did." Cecily looked up at him, stunned. You believe me?" "I saw Nathaniel speaking with Victoria's maid an hour before the gem went missing," Alistair revealed, his voice dropping to a fierce, ragged whisper. "Nathaniel orchestrated this. He promised Victoria something in exchange for causing a scandal, something to disrupt my timeline so the clock runs out. They planted it. Then you must expose them. You must—" "I don't give a damn about them," Alistair interrupted, his gaze dropping to her lips. "I only care about you. Since the moment I found you in my library, I haven't been able to breathe properly. I haven't been able to look at another woman. I am supposed to choose a bride, Cecily, but my heart made its choice days ago." Cecily's breath hitched. "Alistair, no, you cannot. The ton will destroy you. My father's scandal." "To hell with the ton," he murmured fiercely, his hands sliding from her shoulders to frame her face. "To hell with my father's legacy, and the estate, and the titles. Let Nathaniel have it all. I would rather be a penniless commoner with you than a duke with anyone else." And then he kissed her. It was not a polite, restrained kiss of the aristocracy. It was desperate, bruising, and filled with the suppressed longing of two broken people who had finally found home in each other. Cecily's hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, surrendering to the overwhelming tide of emotion she had fought for so long. The storm raged outside the manor windows, rain lashing against the glass, but inside the drawing room, the world had entirely stopped. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Alistair rested his forehead against hers. Marry me tomorrow." Cecily looked at him, her heart pounding. The danger was astronomical. If she said yes, she would be stepping into a war zone. Nathaniel would not stop. Victoria would seek vengeance. The entire high society of London would turn their backs on the Duke of Westmoreland. But looking into Alistair's eyes, Cecily realized she was done hiding. She was done being the victim of her circumstances. "Yes," she whispered fiercely. "I will marry you." But outside the heavy oak doors, in the darkened hallway, someone was listening. A shadow detached itself from the wall and slipped away into the night. The game was far from over, and Nathaniel Hardwick had one final, deadly card to play. The shadow that had detached itself from the hallway wall belonged to Lucy, Lady Victoria's fiercely ambitious lady's maid. Armed with the explosive secret of the Duke's proposal to a destitute companion, she did not run to her mistress. She knew exactly who would pay the highest price for such information. She ran straight to the guest quarters of Lord Nathaniel Hardwick. Monday morning dawned, with an oppressive leaden sky that threatened a torrential downpour. Inside Somerton Park, an eerie quiet had settled over the grand halls. The guests were confined to the drawing rooms, murmuring wildly about the stolen sapphire and the Duke's terrifying outburst the previous night. Alistair wasted no time. Before the sun had fully crested the horizon, he had summoned Mr. Thackeray into his private study. "I require a special marriage license by tomorrow evening, Thackeray," Alistair commanded, pacing before the roaring fire. "Cost is no object. Send my fastest riders to London. The document must bear the signature of Archbishop William Howley. He was a dear friend of my late mother, and he knows my character. If anyone can expedite the ecclesiastical courts in a matter of hours, it is the Archbishop." Thackeray's eyes widened behind his spectacles, his quill pausing over his parchment. "Your Grace, to secure a license of this magnitude so swiftly, and may I ask the name of the bride?" "Miss Cecily Rutherford," Alistair stated, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. The solicitor dropped his quill. "Miss Rutherford? But Your Grace, the scandal, her father's debts, the lack of dowry, the accusations from last night." "Are entirely irrelevant," Alistair cut in, his tone brokering no argument. "I am the Duke of Westmoreland. I will not have my life dictated by the gossiping hens of the Tun, nor by a malicious cousin. You have your orders, Thackeray. See them executed, or find employment elsewhere." As the express riders thundered out of the courtyard, Alistair felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. The ticking clock of his inheritance no longer felt like a death sentence. It felt like a countdown to his liberation. However, downstairs in the servants' corridors, a much darker plot was unfolding. Cecily was in the ironing room, carefully pressing the deep velvet of Victoria's evening gown, her mind entirely consumed by the memory of Alistair's kiss. The sheer impossibility of her situation was terrifying. She was going to be a duchess. The realization made her hands tremble. A sharp knock at the door startled her. It was a young footman, looking nervous, holding a sealed piece of parchment. "A message for you, miss, from His Grace." He said it was highly urgent. Cecily wiped her hands on her apron and broke the wax seal. "Cecily, meet me immediately at the old hunting lodge on the eastern edge of the estate. I have uncovered absolute proof of Nathaniel's theft of the sapphire, but I need you to witness it before I summon the magistrate. Tell no one, Alistair." She frowned. The handwriting was slightly hurried, the ink smudged. It made perfect sense that Alistair would want to secure the evidence against his cousin, but something in her gut twisted uneasily. Still, if Alistair needed her, she would not hesitate. Grabbing her heavy woolen cloak, Cecily slipped out the back entrance of the kitchens, braving the biting wind as she hurried toward the desolate eastern moors. The hunting lodge was a crumbling stone structure that hadn't been used in a decade, situated miles from the main house. As Cecily approached, the wind howling through the barren trees, she noticed the heavy wooden door was slightly ajar. "Alistair?" she called out, stepping into the gloom. The only answer was the sudden, violent slam of the heavy door behind her. Cecily spun around. Standing in the darkness, lit only by a single flickering oil lantern, were three burly men with rough, weathered faces. And stepping out from the shadows of a decaying stairwell, his pale eyes gleaming with malevolent triumph, was Nathaniel Hardwick. "Right on time," Nathaniel purred, adjusting his leather riding gloves. "I must say I am almost impressed by my cousin's taste. You clean up remarkably well for a beggar, Miss Rutherford." "Where is the Duke?" Cecily demanded, backing away, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. "Oh, poor Alistair is currently tearing the manor apart looking for a certain sapphire," Nathaniel laughed dryly. "He has no idea you are here, and he will not find you before the stroke of midnight tomorrow. By then, the deadline will have passed. Somerton Park will be mine, and my first act as its master will be to ship you off to a workhouse in the darkest corner of the north." "He will find me," Cecily said, lifting her chin, refusing to let him see her terror. "He sent riders to London. We are to be married." Nathaniel's smile vanished, replaced by a snarl of genuine rage. "A minor inconvenience. A marriage requires a bride. Gag her and tie her to the chair." He snapped at the men. "If she makes a sound, break her jaw." Back at the manor, the hours bled away. By mid-afternoon, Alistair's initial frustration at not finding Cecily had morphed into a cold, paralyzing dread. She had missed luncheon. She was not in the library, nor the conservatory. He cornered Mrs. Danvers, who reported that Cecily had vanished from the ironing room. Alistair's mind raced. He burst into Lady Victoria's chambers without knocking. Victoria shrieked, clutching a silk robe to her chest. "Your Grace! What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Alistair crossed the room in 3 massive strides, looming over her like an avenging angel. "Where is she? Where is Cecily? How should I know where my insolent maid has wandered off to?" Victoria sneered, recovering her haughty composure. "Perhaps she ran away out of shame." Alistair slammed his hand against the vanity mirror, the glass cracking down the center. Victoria flinched, genuinely terrified. "Do not play games with me, Victoria," Alistair said, his voice a low, vibrating growl. "I know Nathaniel planted the sapphire. I know you were complicit. If anything has happened to Cecily, I swear before God I will ruin you. I will ensure your name is a curse in every drawing room in England." "Where is she?" Under the crushing weight of his fury, Victoria's resolve shattered. "I don't know," she sobbed, shrinking back. "I swear it. But Lucy, my maid, she heard you propose. She went to Lord Hardwick this morning. He left the estate 2 hours ago on horseback toward the eastern moors." Alistair didn't hear the rest. He was already out the door, shouting for his fastest horse to be saddled. The storm had finally broken, unleashing a torrential downpour upon the estate. As he rode out into the blinding rain, a sleek black carriage pulled into the muddy courtyard of Somerton Park. Stepping out, shielding his face with a heavy bowler hat, was Inspector Charles Field of the newly formed Metropolitan Police. Thackeray had sent for him via telegraph that morning regarding the stolen sapphire, but Inspector Field was about to walk into a crime far more severe than grand larceny. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the moor into a treacherous quagmire. Alistair urged his stallion forward, the animal's hooves slipping and sliding in the mud. The thunder roared, but it was nothing compared to the roar of blood in Alistair's ears. He knew the old hunting lodge. It was the only shelter for miles. Inside the lodge, Cecily sat bound to a heavy wooden chair, a filthy rag tied tight across her mouth. The 3 mercenaries were playing cards by lantern light, while Nathaniel paced furiously by the boarded-up window, checking his pocket watch. It was nearing 8 o'clock on Monday evening. 28 hours left. Suddenly, the heavy oak door of the lodge exploded inward, splintering off its iron hinges. Alistair stood framed in the doorway, soaked to the bone, a heavy riding crop in his hand, looking like a demon summoned from the depths of the storm. The mercenaries scrambled up, drawing knives. Alistair didn't hesitate. He lunged forward with devastating speed. The first man caught a brutal backhand from the weighted end of the riding crop, collapsing instantly. The second lunged with a blade, but Alistair sidestepped, grabbing the man's arm and twisting it until a sickening crack echoed through the room. The third man, seeing the sheer, unstoppable violence in the Duke's eyes, dropped his weapon and bolted out the shattered door into the rain. Nathaniel drew a silver pistol from his coat, his hand shaking. "Stay back, Alistair! I will shoot her!" he screamed, leveling the barrel at Cecily's head. Alistair froze, his chest heaving, his eyes locking onto Cecily. She was pale, her wrists bleeding from struggling against the ropes, but her hazel eyes burned with defiance. She looked at Alistair and shook her head sharply. "Don't surrender. You've lost, Nathaniel," Alistair said, his voice deadly calm over the roaring thunder. "Even if you shoot her, I will tear you apart before you can pull the trigger a second time. You will hang for murder, and you will never see a single penny of the Westmoreland estate." Nathaniel's hand wavered. The cowardly aristocrat had never faced real violence in his life. He was a master of whispers and poison, not blood. In that split second of hesitation, Alistair closed the distance. He slapped the pistol aside and drove his fist into his cousin's jaw. Nathaniel crumpled to the floor, unconscious before he hit the stone. Alistair dropped to his knees beside Cecily, his hands shaking as he tore the gag from her mouth and frantically untied the rough ropes binding her wrists. "I'm here," he whispered, pulling her crushing against his chest. "I have you. You're safe." Cecily buried her face in his wet coat, a ragged sob finally escaping her throat. She clung to him as if he were the only solid thing left in the universe. "He was going to lock me away," she breathed. "He is going to prison," Alistair vowed, kissing the top of her head. "And you are going to be my Duchess." They rode back to Somerton Park together on Alistair's horse, Nathaniel tied securely to a second horse they had found stabled out back. When they arrived at the estate, the Grand Hall was in a state of absolute pandemonium. It was late Tuesday evening. The deadline was hours away. The guests had gathered in the main foyer, whispering frantically. Lady Victoria looked as pale as a ghost. Alistair strode through the massive double doors, carrying Cecily in his arms, both of them covered in mud and soaked in rain. Silence slammed down upon the room. Behind them, two of Alistair's massive gamekeepers dragged a battered, conscious Nathaniel inside, throwing him onto the marble floor. "Your Grace!" Mr. Thackeray pushed his way through the crowd, waving a heavy parchment sealed with red wax. Stock. The writers returned. The special license. Archbishop Howley granted it directly. Excellent. Alistair announced to the stunned crowd, gently setting Cecily on her feet but keeping his arm wrapped tightly around her waist. He looked at the sea of shocked aristocratic faces. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce my bride, the future Duchess of Westmoreland." Gasps erupted, quickly followed by scandalized whispering. Lady Victoria stepped forward, her face twisted in desperation. "Alistair, you cannot. She is ruined. She is a thief. The sapphire, a deep, authoritative voice boomed from the back of the hall, was found precisely where Lord Hardwicke instructed Lady Victoria's maid to hide it prior to its discovery. The crowd parted to reveal Inspector Charles Field of the Metropolitan Police. He stepped forward, tipping his hat to the Duke. "Your Grace, following your solicitor's telegram, I conducted a thorough interview with the staff. The maid, Lucy, confessed to everything under caution. Lord Hardwicke orchestrated the theft to defame Miss Rutherford, and orchestrated her abduction this very morning." Inspector Field looked down at the pathetic figure of Nathaniel on the floor. "Lord Nathaniel Hardwicke, I am arresting you for grand larceny, extortion, and the unlawful abduction of Miss Cecily Rutherford. The Crown will see you transported for a very long time." As the police officers dragged a screaming, cursing Nathaniel away, Alistair turned to Cecily. He gently wiped a streak of mud from her cheek. "I believe we have a wedding to attend." The ceremony took place entirely contrary to aristocratic tradition. There was no grand cathedral, no choir, no diamond tiaras. It happened in the quiet, candlelit sanctuary of the estate's private chapel. The clock in the hallway chimed 1:15. Cecily stood before the altar, still wearing her damp, mud-stained gray woolen dress. But as she looked up into Alistair's eyes, she had never felt more beautiful or more cherished in her entire life. The local vicar spoke the vows with a trembling voice, acutely aware of the dramatic circumstances. When Alistair slid his mother's heavy gold ring onto Cecily's finger, his hand was completely steady. "I, Alistair, take thee, Cecily," he murmured, the words carrying a profound, unbreakable weight. "I, Cecily, take thee, Alistair," she whispered back, a tear slipping down her cheek not of sorrow, but of overwhelming joy. As the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, the heavy, resounding gong of the grandfather clock in the main hall began to chime. Bong, bong, midnight, Tuesday, his 30th birthday. Alistair leaned down and kissed his wife, sealing their fate. The estate was saved, the treacherous cousin was banished in chains, and the malicious whispers of society had been utterly defeated. But as Alistair held Cecily in his arms, the inheritance felt entirely insignificant. He had been forced to choose a bride to save his empire, but in the end, he found the one woman who saved his soul. In the years that followed, the Duke and Duchess of Westmoreland became a legend in London. They did not adhere to the rigid, cruel rules of the ton. They opened their estates to the poor, funded orphanages, and lived fiercely, passionately, and unapologetically on their own terms. And Lady Victoria? She was quietly married off to an elderly baron in the far reaches of the Scottish Highlands, where she spent the rest of her days trying to figure out if Edinburgh was, indeed, a type of cheese. Did you expect that twist? If you're captivated by Alistair and Cecily's unexpected romance and loved seeing them outsmart their ruthless rivals in the final hours, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your fellow romance lovers, and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below telling us what you would do if you had only 7 days to find true love. See you in the next story.